Hey folks, today we'll be designing and animating slides with dynamic liquid simulations. We'll be creating 4 different slides, each using a different style of liquid animation. This will be a long video, so we have time codes for each separate slide design. So let's get going. Before we start creating our slides, let's get into the DNA of our design. And we'll start with the colors. So our primary color will be aquamarine along with its hex code given here. If you'd like to pause the screen and copy it. We'll combine aquamarine with blue chill to form this beautiful green gradient, and then on the other hand we'll combine aquamarine with dodger blue to create this nice blue gradient, and together they make beautiful ocean inspired colors. And for any shapes that we use in the background, we'll go with a simple light gray color. And next up are our organic fluidic shapes, which are quite easy to create. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I've pre-created a few of these shapes, but they are quite easy to make. So I'll quickly show you how to do that. Let's open a new slide and maybe draw a circle. Then right click on the circle, go to Edit Points, click on the black dot and right click and make sure Smooth Point is selected. Then all you need to do is use the handles on each edit point and move them around until you have a fluidic shape to your liking. You can experiment with all types of shapes and sizes as long as you try and make it fluidic, natural looking or organic looking. And those are pretty much all the elements we'll be needing to design this beautiful fluidic, eye-catching slide. So let's start designing this. I'll open a new slide and bring in one of these circular fluidic shapes, paste it onto the new slide. Bring over our 2 colors, which is the aquamarine and dodger blue. Paste them over, right click on our shape, go to Format Shape and do a gradient fill. Let's remove the unnecessary gradient stops since we only need 2 colors. So for our first stop, let's go to the eyedropper and add aquamarine. And for our second stop, let's go to the eyedropper and add the dodger blue. So now that's done. Let's add a little bit of transparency to the aquamarine, say about 20%. And on the blue, let's take it up a little bit higher, say 40%. Next, let's go to our animations and add the spin animation. So it looks something like this. Let's right click, go to Effect Options, maybe change this to counterclockwise, and under Timings, we can slow this down a little bit more, and let's make it run until the end of the slide. So it'll continuously rotate like this. Next up, all we need to do is copy paste this and overlap it. So once you make a copy, just rotate it slightly, make another copy, rotate it a little bit more, and continue that until you have a full rotation. So I've made about 8 shapes over here, as you can see. All have the spin animation. Let's select all of them, go to Arrange and align them to center and to middle. So now let's take a look at it. I made one mistake. I should have set all the animations to run with each other. So let's start with previous. Now let's take another look. And as you can see, the overlapping shapes make this beautiful wave-like fluidic effect. So let's move this to the center of the slide, and in fact I'll make one little change. In the effect options, instead of 3 seconds, I'll make it 2 seconds so the waves move a little faster. And that I think looks a little better. Next, let's bring in another shape, paste it over and stretch it across the slide. Let's send it to the back and give it the light gray fill, and let's increase its transparency also until it's just visible. And then finally all we need to do is add our font. So since we've chosen a white color, it doesn't stand out very well against the background. So let's go to Format Shape, Text Options, to Text Effects and give it a bit of a shadow. Let's increase the size of the shadow. Let's increase its blur and a little bit of the transparency. So the shadow is not super prominent, but it helps the text stand out. We can align the text in the center. And let's take a look. And that's a really quick and easy way of making a beautiful fluidic slide. Now once you have this shape ready, you can use it in multiple ways to design various layouts. So let's copy the shape that we've made and take it over to a new slide. Let's paste it, and making sure everything is selected, press Ctrl Shift and drag the shape and move it over to the corner. Then we can bring in our other elements, send one to back, move the text around a little bit. And this way you can make all sorts of really interesting layouts which are dynamic and have this beautiful fluidic element to them. Let's take our difficulty level up by a notch and check out slide number 2. This has multiple shapes that are spinning and breathing in and out. So let's try designing this. Let's go over to a new slide. Make sure we have our blank layout selected. Let's go up and choose a few of the shapes that we'll be using. We'll move the square shape to a side for now and bring in this amoebic kind of shape. And let's fill in our gradient. And that looks pretty neat. Next up, let's add animations to this. First up, we'll add the spin animation. Change the timings. Now we can customize this. Since I don't want either 5 or 20, I want it to rotate at 10 seconds. So all we need to do is select 2 and replace it with 10. And on repeat, let's end of slide. There we go. And of course, start with previous. So let's have a look at it. So it's rotating at a nice, slow and steady pace. Now we also want it to grow and shrink to give the breathing effect. So let's click on Add Animation, and under the emphasis, let's select Grow and Shrink. Let's set it to start with previous. Go to Effect Options. Change the 150 to roughly 80 because we don't want it to get super large. Let's click on Auto Reverse. And under Timings, let's set it to End of Slide. The duration I'll leave at 2 seconds for now. Let's see if that works. The grow effect is quite subtle, but it's there. So now that we have our shape set, along with its animations, let's make a few copies of this. Copy one, let's make it slightly larger and send it to back. Copy two. Once again, let's make it larger and again send it to back. And finally, copy 3, which will go outside the parameters of the slide, and again we can send it to back. Now one thing we should do is make sure all our shapes are selected, go to Format Object, and give the shapes a little bit of transparency so we can see the shapes overlapping each other. And we can also change the angles of the shapes a little bit. The shape in the background I'm going to change to a grey color and increase its transparency till it's barely visible. That helps the other shapes stand out a lot better. So play around with the transparency of the shapes until you're satisfied. Let's take a look in full screen. So all the shapes are moving very closely together. I would recommend we change their angle a little more, so there's a bit of discontinuity between them. There we go. Now let's add a picture to our central shape. So click on Picture Fill, Insert, and let's add our picture. Now the picture is rotated along with the shape. So let's click on the Rotate with Shape option and basically deselect it. Then go to Picture Format, Crop, and let's resize our image so it fits in the shape nicely. Then let's increase the transparency of this picture a little bit so the background shapes kind of show through. So I've increased it to about 30%. But when we play this, the picture is rotating along with the other shapes, and we don't want that. We only want the picture to grow and shrink. So let's go back to our animation pane and remove the rotate option, or basically the spin option, from this image. There. And that looks really nice. Now we can go ahead and add a few more elements. So the square over here, let's remove the shape Fill and give it a nice bright outline and put it over our picture. We can then select any of the previous shapes, go to Animation Painter and give this outline the same animation as well. Let's add our text in. And finally, let's add a few decorative elements. So I'll choose this egg shape, bring it down, and also give this a gradient fill. I'll remove any transparencies from this and give it a bit of a shadow, similar shadow that we used for our text. So increase the size, increase the blur, and increase the transparency a bit. Let's have it overlap our text by just a little bit. And similarly, you can make a lot of other little design elements to make your slide look nicer. And finally, what I've done is I've added a little background image. So I'll quickly add that as well. Let's crop the image to fill the slide. The reason I've added this image is it adds a little more depth to the entire look. And there we go. So we have this beautiful organically breathing slide. Now let's compare it with the original slide once. Now of course this slide is a lot more detailed because I spent a lot more time making this, but as you can see, they're fairly similar. And once again, let's turn up the difficulty level for slide number 3. And here we have a slide in perpetual motion with the liquid shapes fading in and out, growing and rotating. So there's a lot of stuff going on this slide. Well, let's not waste any more time and start designing. We'll begin by designing the primary element of this slide over here on the top right. So let's bring the shapes down that we'll be needing for this. So we'll be using this strange potato shape and the square shape. Let's bring those onto our main slide. First up, let's create multiple layers of our square shape. Let's do a gradient fill first of all, and this time let's choose the green color. Let's make another copy, and this time let's give it a shape outline but no fill. Let's make yet another copy of this. In the shape outline, let's increase the weight of this, and under line let's give it a gradient fill. Let's remove the extra stops from this and give it the blue gradient that we've been using all along. So now we have three different types of overlapping colors. So now let's adjust them and change their angles a bit. And let's go up to our previous slide. Go to Animations, double click on Animation Painter, come back down and click on each shape. Let's take a look if all of them are growing and rotating, and they are. Let's align them to the middle and the center. So there we go. Now we'll bring this shape in and add a little picture to it. Let's change the picture that we used. Now it's auto-filled the transparency, so let's reduce that a little bit. Let's increase the transparency on a green shape by just a touch. Make a few other adjustments to the sizes and angles. That looks pretty neat. Let's make another copy of this shape. No fill. And let's give it the same gradient line. So there's no exact one way to do this. You can rotate the shapes, decrease their transparency, increase the transparency. However, it matches your style of presentation. Let's add some animations to the two new shapes that we've also made. So I'll just move them apart. Now, for the outline that we've created, we simply need to use the animation painter on it. And we can use the animation painter on the image as well, but we don't want it to rotate. So let's just go over and delete the spin from it. Now let's select everything and bring it together with a line. So it looks something like this. Let's move it over to the top right corner. And we want it to travel continuously from the top right to the bottom left. So in order to do that, let's go to Add Animation and add a motion path. Let's set the motion path to start with Previous and then drag each shape over to the left corner. Now let's take a look and see if that worked. Wow, that's going really fast. So let's select all our motion path animations in the pane. Right click on them, go to Effect Options. First of all, let's select the Auto Reverse. Let's remove the smooth start and smooth ends. And then in timing, let's slow it down to say 15 seconds. And let's set it to repeat until end of slide. Now let's take another look. And now our shape is rotating, breathing, and moving continuously across the slide. Now, depending on the nature of your slide, you can increase the motion path speed, but for now we'll leave it at 15 seconds. Next up, let's select the shape that we initially made, make a copy of it, drag it down to the bottom right corner, and change its motion path to travel to the top left instead this time. Let's right click on it and change the picture. Let's go back to our animation pane and add an animation to this, which would be fade in. Let's set it to play with previous and increase the duration a little bit, and then add yet another animation, which is fade out. Again, start with previous and increase its duration, but let's move our fade out to the end. Let's take a look and see if that works. So the shape is fading in and it's fading out. I'll make the shape a little larger, increase the travel speed, this time to, let's say, 8 seconds. So it fades in. We can see the transparencies overlapping, and it fades out. Next up, let's add a background image and text. So I'll just copy that over from our existing slide, send it to back, and add some text as well. I'll change the filling of this text. Go to text options, change the gradient from blue to green so it kind of matches the colors on this slide. And let's see. So I think the orange picture that we've used could be a little more transparent. And we need to make sure that the floating shapes are in front of all the other elements. And that looks much better. So using these techniques, we can create a slide like this. And for the shapes, we simply need to create these shapes with gradients in them and add a motion animation which is set to auto reverse. And finally, we have our fourth slide with these beautiful cascading waves and rotating shapes. So let's make this. Let's go on to a new slide. Let's go to our shapes, and under stars and banners, we'll find something called the wave and the double wave. So for this tutorial, I'll be using the double wave. So draw the shape. Let's rotate it to be vertical and fit in the slide. Let's use the yellow node to exaggerate the wave and remove the shape outline. Next, let's format this and fill it with our gradient. So it's automatically picked up our gradient. And finally, let's give it a little bit of a drop shadow. So let's offset it to bottom left. Increase the size by a bit and the blur by quite a lot. Let's reduce the distance and increase the transparency. So we just want a very slight shadow to be visible. Next, let's make our slide size really small and make 3 other copies of this wave and place them on top of each other. Let's make sure they're all aligned properly. Then go to Shape Format, Merge Shapes and Union. So we have this really long continuous gradient of a wave. Let's make another copy of it and rotate it. So now we have the gradient flowing the other way around. Let's send it behind our previous shape. Let's take the first wave again, make yet another copy and send it behind the second wave. So I'll show you in full screen. We have something that looks like this. Let's move it over to the side of our slide. And finally, let's add a motion path animation to our three shapes. So let's go to Add Animation, add the motion path, and for each shape, let's drag it down until the top of the shape matches the top of the slide, like this. Let's do that to the other two shapes as well. There we go. Let's go to our animation pane, select all three motion paths, start with previous, effect options, remove the smooth end and the smooth start. Let's give it a duration of roughly say 10 seconds for now and see if that works, and repeat until end of slide. So let's see. It looks pretty good, but I think the shape should be moving a little faster. So I'll select all three again and change the timing to 7 seconds. And that gives us a much better wave effect. It looks pretty cool. Then we can just copy this shape, all three shapes, make a duplicate of them and drag them over to the right. And this time in fill, let's give them the solid gray fill. And let's increase their transparency by quite a bit, so they're only just visible. About 80% seems to work. Then all we need to do is populate our slide with our rotating shapes. So we can copy over what we made originally in slide number 2. Let's bring it over here. Let's remove the shapes we don't need and send the rest to back. So it would look something like this. And if I show you the original slide, you see we have multiple shapes rotating and the text over on the right. So that's it, folks. Those are my tips on how we can create multiple styles of liquid shapes and all sorts of dynamic animations. I hope you find this content helpful. Hit the like and subscribe buttons to show your love. Once again, thank you for watching, and remember to keep on creating.